Hello everyone, welcome back to Rewired with your host Khadija Farosh. For those of you just joining us, this podcast is all about differentiating between fact and fiction through exploring our teenage minds and psychology. Now I don't want to spoil the rest of the episode, so I want you all to sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey everybody, it's been a while. I've certainly missed recording. I've definitely missed you guys. How have you all been? How have your vacations been? If you had any, let me know down in the comments below. I have a very important announcement to make before we get started with any of the psych content that we're going to be discussing. I'd like to wish Rewired a happy 1-year anniversary. It's true, my child is officially 1 year old. Well, 1 year and like about a month from when I'm recording this. And I just want to say to anyone that's been here from the start, I really, truly, deeply appreciate your patience, and I hope I've improved, hopefully, over the past year. And to my new listeners, I hope you'll stick around for the years to come. To all the students listening, I hope your back-to-school journeys have been somewhat seamless, and I'd like to wish my condolences, because I know what you're going through. But yeah, I've definitely missed recording, and I feel like after this summer I have a lot of new topics for discussion. The first thing I wanted to address was the title of today's episode. It looks a little bit different than usual, and so essentially during my summer I had the opportunity to spend 2 weeks at Cambridge University in the UK for a psychology summer program. I attended a combination of lectures, discussions, external activities which weren't as academic, and I met a lot of new people. But aside from that, one of the highlights of this trip was that I got to work on my own research project while I was there. So today I thought I'd do something just a little bit different. We'll still be focusing on a single psychology concept like usual, but instead it'll be my topic of research, and I'll be walking you through it from a more personal perspective based on the research I'd conducted and the conclusions that I had come to. But before we get into it, I just wanted to disclaim that the research I conducted was fairly thorough, and I don't want to keep you guys here for too long because that would be a bore. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about will be simplified, but if you guys would like to read the literature review that I wrote up, let me know in the comments and I'll find a way to send it over. It'll probably also be a simplified version that I've cut down, but I will keep the main bits and pieces in, but it'll be more in depth than what I'll get into today. I hope you guys enjoy this different approach, and we will be back to normal, uploading more consistently and the way that we used to soon. So like I said, as a part of this program, we were tasked to create a personal project on a topic of our choice, and we were told to write up a paper or a research report and present it to our professors and peers. Obviously, we weren't conducting our own experiments. This was mainly just a review of existing literature on a topic of our choice. So the project that I worked on was on something called theory of mind. And to describe what theory of mind actually is, I wanted to propose a few questions, or rather scenarios, so that I'm not talking at you guys for the whole episode. So I wanted to ask, do you think you're able to understand that people act, for example, in relation to their desires? Like when your friend, for instance, reaches for an apple, can you infer that they may be hungry? Or rather, can you assume others' emotions when they're different from your own? Like, for example, if you see somebody fall and they start crying, can you assume that they're upset, even if you are not hurt physically or emotionally yourself? If yes, you have probably engaged in a fundamental psychological capacity, which is theory of mind. So in psych, theory of mind is defined as the ability to attribute mental states like beliefs, intentions, and emotions to ourselves and others. And theory of mind can be divided into two main categories, and that is affective, AFFECTIVE, not EFF, and cognitive. So affective theory of mind focuses on the emotion and feelings part of it, and the cognitive theory of mind focuses on the thoughts and beliefs aspect. So a lot of theory of mind research, when it was being conducted in its early stages, was done in correlation to autism. And this is because a lot of psychologists wanted to examine whether autistic people had quote, theory of mind, or had theory of mind. And this is an incredibly controversial statement, but we will be talking about that in a second. First, I wanted to talk to you guys about why I chose this topic of research. So the reason I was drawn to this topic is fairly personal, but I will be sharing it this episode. So my interest in theory of mind started a lot longer before I encountered it during this course. I first came across it during personal speculative research on autism spectrum disorder. And at the time at the time of my research, I was navigating a period of self-questioning. And this was about 3 years ago. And I was doubting whether I was as neurotypical as I had been told. And over roughly 3 years, I collected symptoms, stories, life experiences, anecdotes from people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which are 2 types of neurodiversity, that resonated deeply with me. And eventually I sought a formal assessment and received a diagnosis of characteristics of level 1 autism, often referred to as high-functioning autism. So following this, I dove back into literature on autism and its associated disorders, and I particularly focused on the limitations and biases in diagnostic procedures. And my main focus was in women and people of color. And this is because a lot of women go undiagnosed because early autism research and still current autism research is very heavily focused on the male autistic population. And a lot of autism research is done in Western populations. So this leads to a lot of women going undiagnosed and a lot of people of color going undiagnosed. And this path eventually led me back to theory of mind and its criticized associations with both autism and cultural variability. So essentially with this project, I was working on challenging this idea that theory of mind presents the same way across all neurodivergent or autistic people, as well as across all different cultures. My aim was to dispel different stereotypes about theory of mind and autism, partly because I'm around teenagers almost daily who consistently throw the word autistic around as an insult without knowing that they could be speaking to an autistic person in the moment. And I also wanted to spread awareness about the importance of cross-cultural research and how a lot of psychological research is conducted in the West rather than other parts of the world. So, we talked about what theory of mind is, but just to repeat in simple terms, it's the ability to acknowledge that somebody else has thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that are different from your own, and the ability to understand and infer these thoughts, beliefs, and feelings. It's not just about other people as well, it's also about your own personal feelings, thoughts, and beliefs. So, in its early discovery, psychologists tested the development of theory of mind in children ages around 3 to 6, and a classic way that they tested for it was with something called the Sally-Ann task. This was one of the first tests created to examine theory of mind development in children and presentation. So I'll describe how it goes in kind of a story because it's given to these children as a narrative. Essentially, we have Sally and Anne. Sally has a basket and Anne has a box. Sally puts a marble in her basket and then she leaves the room. And while she's gone, Anne moves the marble into her box. When Sally comes back, the children are asked, where will Sally look for the marble? If the child says the basket, or Sally's basket, then they're considered to be using theory of mind. They've recognized that Sally believes the marble is where she left it, even though they know that it's somewhere else. If the child supposedly didn't have theory of mind, they'd say the box, or Anne's box, because they can't separate what they know from what Sally knows. Kids usually develop this ability around ages 4 to 5, and once they do, it's perceived to almost change everything in their lives due to societal influences. So this can be friendships, communication, empathy, any sort of relationships, etc. And it's basically the foundation of being able to see the world from someone else's perspective. Now, let's address the obvious question, of course, how does this relate to autism research and where did this idea of a correlation come from? So before we get to theory of mind, I wanted to talk briefly about autism in general so that we're not throwing around terms that you might not recognize. So autism spectrum disorder is defined as a complex neurodevelopmental condition that involves persistent challenges with social communication, restricted interests, and repetitive behavior. ASD is a dimensional disorder, meaning that its symptoms exist on a spectrum with varying degrees of severity, rather than being either present or absent, which would be categorical. So the general characteristics that most, not all, but most autistic people share are differences in social interaction and communication from neurotypical people, like difficulty understanding general social cues and making eye contact for long periods of time. They may also have restricted, repetitive behaviors, strong preferences for routine, repetitive movements, and deep focus interests. They may also have sensory sensitivities, feeling much more or much less sensitive to sights, sounds, scents, tastes, textures, etc. than other people, and they might have differences in emotional regulation patterns. So autism presents differently across men and women, and that's incredibly important to note. And it's also important to note that a lot of foundational research into autism was done using male subjects. So, like I previously mentioned, a lot of general comments made about autistic people tend to refer to males with autism. So I advise you guys to keep an eye out if you want to do research on autism on your own. That was incredibly brief, which is why it's a goal of mine to put out an episode on autism in the near future, or neurodiversity in general, so keep an eye out for that. So let's get back and link this to theory of mind. Back in the 80s and 90s, a psychologist named Simon Baron-Cohen put forward the mind blindness theory. He claimed that all autistic people lack theory of mind, and that they struggle to imagine what they themselves, as well as others, are thinking or feeling to all degrees. For a while in the psychology community, this idea stuck. Some autistic people did struggle with the theory of mind tests like the Sally-Ann test, so researchers saw that and thought, okay, autistic people must not have theory of mind. But this was an extreme generalization. The statement, all autistic people don't have theory of mind, is extreme, and it's a great generalization because it encompasses two generalized substatements. So the first is the obvious, all autistic people. Once again, autism presents differently across every single person with autism. And of course there are overarching characteristics that most autistic people will share, but some might fall higher or lower on the spectrum, some might have traits others might not. It's very complex, and it's too complex to be making a generalized statement like this one. The second generalization made, or the second subphrase would be, don't have theory of mind. And I'm putting emphasis on theory of mind. So the testing processes and presentation of theory of mind do vary. Some individuals may have higher cognitive theory of mind than affective, or the opposite. Some people may be able to attribute their personal beliefs, thoughts, and emotions more of those than others, or the opposite, and testing procedures originally used did not accommodate to different types of people, leading to unrealistic and inaccurate results. And this was proved, like I found in my research. So later findings have revealed a more complex idea about theory of mind in autistic people, and that is that they may develop alternative strategies for social understanding, and performance on theory of mind tasks can vary greatly depending on their personal abilities, their executive functioning levels, their environments, as well as the severity of their autism and where they lie on the spectrum. In terms of testing, a lot of those early tests relied heavily on language. So a lot of tests usually required comprehension of sophisticated vocabulary, making it less suitable for people with language-based challenges. So impairments in communication are often associated diagnostically with autism, and if the tests that were used to examine theory of mind relied on complex language, then it's obvious that autistic people would struggle with the tests, receiving inaccurate and generally low results. Also, a majority of theory of mind tests relied on verbal communication, which is a form of communication that a portion of autistic people struggle with. And once again, if these tests are inherently clashing with the diagnostically recognized difficulties that autistic people face, then they will inherently show inaccurate results. It's kind of like testing whether someone can swim by asking them to write an essay about swimming. If they don't write well or they have lower language skills, that doesn't prove that they can't swim, it just proves that the test was designed badly or in a way that doesn't accommodate in a suitable way. So since then, newer research regarding theory of mind and testing procedures have used more approachable and universally accommodating language. And this has shown that many autistic people do actually have theory of mind. A lot of high-functioning people with autism, whether they may be children or adults, tend to respond to theory of mind questionnaires and tests with ease because they learn to mask and adapt to societal pressures and societal structures. And then the people higher on the spectrum who are less high-functioning do still show lacks in these theory of mind tests, and this just proves that a generalized statement saying that all autistic people don't have theory of mind is inaccurate. So this mind blindness theory oversimplified things, and it did fuel harmful stereotypes. A lot of people assume that autistic individuals couldn't empathize, which isn't true, and people still make assumptions like these. So essentially part of my project was digging into how we can better understand theory of mind in autism without falling into generalizations. The other angle that I looked at was culture and social factors, and this was also incredibly impactful and incredibly interesting. So most early research on theory of mind was done in what psychologists call WEIRD societies. This stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic Societies. So basically the US, the UK, and parts of Europe. But once studies branched out into other parts of the world, it became clear that theory of mind doesn't develop in the exact same way all around the world. So cross-cultural research on theory of mind revealed both universal developmental patterns and cultural variations in how this ability develops. And little cross-cultural research has been conducted when it comes to theory of mind, but my main goal was to analyze existing social and cultural research which discuss communities that don't identify with the characteristics of the WEIRD scale. For example, there was one study that I read that compared Chinese and Australian kids. The Chinese kids scored lower on certain emotional theory of mind tasks, but they performed comparably to the Australian kids on cognitive theory of mind, which, just to remind you, is the more of the thoughts and beliefs side rather than the emotive side, which is affective. And the study also examined external factors which may have posed as predictors for the development of these two types, and they found that the number of older siblings each child had did influence their theory of mind development, specifically cognitive theory of mind development. So this showed that the number of older siblings each child had was a positive predictor of cognitive theory of mind for Chinese children, but a negative predictor of cognitive theory of mind for Australian children. So basically, Chinese kids with older siblings tended to have better cognitive theory of mind, while Australian kids with older siblings tended to have worse cognitive theory of mind. I have said theory of mind a lot of times in the past 18 minutes, but don't worry, you will be hearing it more. Another study compared kids in Vietnam and the Netherlands, and this was a study that looked at collectivist versus individualist cultures and their influence on theory of mind. So basically, collectivist cultures are communities that put more focus and priority on the group needs rather than the individual needs, and individualist cultures are the opposite. So in collectivist communities like Vietnam, kids were more often better at understanding group perspectives, and in more individualist cultures, like in the Netherlands, kids were more focused on individual beliefs and personal thoughts. Now, the reasonings behind this were incredibly interesting, yet slightly complex, so I urge you guys to read up on it, or if you would like to read the report that I wrote, then let me know. Even parenting styles make a difference in theory of mind development, which is another point that I discovered. In the UK, for example, parents are more likely to encourage their children to talk about their feelings, which supports emotional theory of mind. And that's a concept called mind-mindedness. So a parent's tendency to treat their child as an individual with their own thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs is mind-mindedness. And examples of some mind-minded comments that can be made by parents include those of which that acknowledge their child's emotional states. For example, when they notice their kid gravitating towards a specific toy, they may state or ask, "Oh, do you like that toy?" out loud to acknowledge their children's interest in a certain thing. And in Hong Kong, which was the comparative state, they found that mind-mindedness is not as practiced, and parents might emphasize social behavior and rules instead, which shaped a different kind of perspective taking. The final thing that I discovered in my research was more in relation to socioeconomic factors. So a lot of recent studies have explored the impact of socioeconomic status on the development of theory of mind, and the key takeaways show that impoverished preschool children develop theory of mind at differing, slower rates to their wealthier peers. And results compared that against 6 cross-cultural samples reported from external studies, and they showed similarities across a majority of them. So this demonstrates that socioeconomic status does, in fact, influence the presentation of theory of mind, telling us that impoverished children may struggle more with theory of mind than those wealthier. A lot of these case studies essentially show that theory of mind develops in different ways across different geographical and cultural landscapes. And so my big point was that theory of mind isn't one universal milestone, but it's flexible and it's influenced by culture, language, family, environment, etc. And that makes it much more complex and definitely much more interesting. So after 2 weeks of research and discussion, what did I take away and what did you hopefully take away from this episode? The first thing I got was that psychology sometimes jumps to conclusions. Saying that all autistic people lack theory of mind isn't only wrong, but it's harmful, and it ignores the diversity of autistic experiences and reinforces stigma. And with that, I'd like to take a quick moment, being that we're on the topic of autism, to say something. So, among teens or people my age, autism has become a growing source of ridicule and jokes, which is harmful and, more importantly, useless and counterproductive. Using the term autistic or the concept of autism in a distasteful way will never have an upside. You may be directly conversing with an autistic person in the moment, Exhibit A. An autistic person may be in the area, you may be influencing other people to perceive autism in a negative light. It's never beneficial. I hope to do an episode on autism or neurodiversity as a whole in the future. It's actually incredibly interesting to understand how different people think differently. But the overall takeaway is that you shouldn't use the term autistic or autism as a whole in a negative way. Anyway, the second takeaway is that culture matters way more than earlier studies gave it credit for. So if we only use Western or WEIRD models to define what normal development looks like, we risk misunderstanding kids or just people from all over the world. And this can be incredibly harmful. I mean, if a person in a non-Western country had speculations that they had a certain disorder, for example, and they're reading up on definitions which are better suited towards Western populations, they might dismiss their speculations and stay left untreated for the rest of their life. And finally, this research reminded me, of course, why I love psychology in the first place. It taught me that people are different and people are complicated and that we don't fit neatly into boxes. And every time research tries to put us in boxes, it misses the richness of human diversity. So yeah, that was a look into 2 weeks of my summer. It was an incredibly interesting topic of research, at least for me, but I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much for letting me share a more personal episode today, and I'll be back next time with something more in my usual style, but I hope you enjoyed coming with me on this Cambridge research detour. Alright, that's a wrap for today's episode. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can find me on Instagram and YouTube at OfficialRewired. My email is khadija.farrash@gmail.com if you'd like to contact me there. That's khadija.farrash@gmail.com. Or if you're feeling extra chatty, join our community Discord where you can hang out and discuss this and upcoming episodes, have access to early snippets and announcements, and a couple more special perks. You can find all the links to my socials in the show notes below and in the Linktree in my description. Don't forget to drop a comment, question, feedback, or anything you'd like to let me know of down below if you're feeling extra generous. And if you really enjoyed, a 5-star rating on Spotify or a like and subscribe on YouTube would mean the world. I can't wait to chat with you again soon and see you in the next episode.